Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Tuesday Night Podcast with your host, Brian Savage. Let's dive right into it, folks. In light of the slaying of George Floyd and numerous other African Americans to racial injustices, protests have erupted all over U.S. cities and around the world. This high frequency of protests haven't been this prevalent since the Civil Rights era back in the 60s. African Americans, along with other members of disenfranchised minority groups, and even some white individuals, reached a breaking point and said enough was enough. As a result, they marched the streets of many cities across the U.S. to protest against racial injustices and systemic racism. These recent events can all be traced to a common stereotype that is often permeated throughout the media. I'm referring to the black criminality stereotype, of course. Now, this begs the question, what exactly contributes to this unfair and distorted stereotype? Black criminality stereotype has been commonplace for the media landscape for generations. Common depictions of African Americans as criminals in the media can be very problematic. This can lead to this particular social group being perceived as one-dimensional and having no humanity. Furthermore, the media robs them of their self-identities and makes them appear inferior to other social groups that are perceived as being more superior. It's important to understand that African Americans do in fact have rich traditions and culture, offer redeeming qualities, and contain complex positive layers just like any other social group. Unfortunately, we're never exposed to these positive attributes of this social group, in part because the media is dominated by a white ethnocentric ideology in which many news stories, films, and TV shows are often told from the white perspective. As this may be the case, there's a theory out there that can help explain what contributes to the black criminality stereotype. Cultivation theory is an excellent way to help explain the components or attributes that are correlated with this stereotype. The theory itself suggests that heavy media consumers have the tendency to have their attitudes and values cultivated toward their perception of reality portrayed by the media. For example, people who have little to no experience with the African American social group and are also heavy consumers of media are likely to believe and conform to these negative, distorted representations of African Americans in the media, in this case being portrayed as criminals, because the only experience that they have with this social group is through the media. Furthermore, media priming is another concept that can help explain this phenomenon as well. Priming is simply a process which can be understood in regards to associations. For instance, if the media has a continuation of identifying African Americans as criminal perpetrators, then this association could become so secure in one's mind that just by thinking about a member of that social group could prime or trigger thoughts about that member being perceived as a criminal. This association of African Americans being perceived as criminals could then trigger other notes or other related characteristics that are commonly associated with this stereotype, such as aggressiveness, hostility, danger, drugs, etc. These strong and stable links, although differ between heavy and light media consumers. Light consumers tend to have weaker links in which will cause them to have a less intense psychological reaction when encountering an African American. In contrast, as one might have guessed, heavy media consumers tend to have stronger links, which will trigger a more intense reaction in their minds when encountering an African American. Now, keep in mind, it's important to understand that although we're all aware of the stereotype, that doesn't mean that we personally endorse it or not. The stereotype just happens to be encoded or stored in our memory.
Prosecute the police! No justice, no peace! Eradicate the police! No justice, no peace!
About 401 years ago, all this thing started with slavery. And through the years, basically what you see is suppression, oppression, and all that stuff. So if you want to talk about Black Lives Matter, it's very justified. In my opinion, all the races, except for white, they have put all these people down on their feet for years and years. Let's say when Lincoln put those people free, what happened? Blacks fought for the North, of course, against the South. And who won? Blacks won. The black people and white people from the North won.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was my special guest Mike on his thoughts on the topic. We'll be right back after this quick break.
Prosecute the police! No justice, no peace! Eradicate the
critical to understand that all media messages are constructed. In other words, all media messages are constructed or framed in ways to affect how audience members perceptualize and understand the messages that have been transmitted to them by the media. It's very important to think critically and challenge the messages that the media are sending you. Evaluate all the details and components of media messages and come up with your own perspectives or opinions. Establish a more objective point of view when evaluating or reviewing media messages. Furthermore, conceptually challenge the media's white ethnocentric ideologies in regards to the black criminality stereotype and other misrepresented and distorted depictions of African Americans in the media. Start questioning your thoughts. Question why you thought of certain things or attributes that are correlated with the African American criminality stereotype whenever encountering members of the African American community. Moreover, try to speak or have conversations with African Americans you may know to get their perspectives on the topic. Thank you everyone for tuning into the Tuesday Night Podcast with your host, Brian Savage. Everyone take care and stay safe.